Using logical and objective communication is one of the most powerful tools for dismantling a narcissist's behavior without falling into the traps of emotional manipulation. Narcissists thrive in environments where they can control the emotional tone of a conversation, often using guilt, anger, or praise to manipulate the people around them. The moment emotions become the center of a discussion, they can exploit that vulnerability to shift the narrative in their favor. By keeping your communication grounded in logic, facts, and objectivity, you prevent the narcissist from using their usual emotional tactics to cloud the situation. One of the primary reasons logical communication is so effective with a narcissist is because they cannot easily manipulate facts or reason. Narcissists typically thrive on exaggeration, distortion, and selective memory to shape the narrative in their favor. They may embellish their achievements, downplay their faults, or outright lie to gain admiration or control. When you stick to facts, you strip away their ability to control the conversation with emotional appeals or fabricated stories. This forces the narcissist to face reality, which is something they are often resistant to doing. By sticking to clear, verifiable facts, you disrupt their narrative and make it harder for them to deflect responsibility or distort the truth. For instance, when discussing a situation where the narcissist has behaved poorly, you can calmly outline the specific actions or behaviors that are problematic. Rather than making it about their character, which may provoke defensiveness or anger, focus on what happened and why it was unacceptable. This approach removes the personal attack from the equation and keeps the conversation focused on the behavior, not the narcissist's fragile ego. You could say something like, when you did X, it made me feel Y because Z, keeping the tone neutral and focusing on the specific event rather than engaging in a battle of emotions. Narcissists often try to gaslight others, manipulating their perceptions of reality to make them doubt their own memories or judgments. By sticking to a clear, logical explanation of events, you make it more difficult for them to confuse or distort the situation. For example, if they deny something they've said or done, calmly and respectfully restate the facts. That's not how I remember it. I recall you said this at that time, and that's why it led to that outcome. This type of response is grounded in clear communication and avoids the emotional reactivity they are hoping to provoke. It forces them to confront the truth and removes their ability to manipulate the situation with emotional outbursts. Another key element of logical communication is maintaining emotional neutrality. Narcissists are expert manipulators who can detect weakness or vulnerability in others. If they sense an emotional reaction, whether it's anger, frustration, or hurt, they will use that as leverage to control the conversation or shift blame onto you. By remaining calm and composed, you avoid giving them the emotional ammunition they seek. Instead of being drawn into arguments or emotional exchanges, you respond to their claims with objective reasoning. For example, if a narcissist accuses you of being selfish or unreasonable, rather than defending yourself emotionally, you could calmly explain why your actions were justified based on your needs or your understanding of the situation. This approach not only protects your emotional boundaries, but also gives the narcissist less room to manipulate or escalate the conversation. The narcissist might attempt to provoke a stronger emotional reaction by pushing buttons, but by remaining rational, you deny them the satisfaction of seeing you upset or defensive. This can confuse or disarm them, as their usual tactics of emotional provocation will fall flat. Furthermore, using logical communication means avoiding personal attacks or inflammatory language. Narcissists are highly sensitive to criticism and will often respond to any perceived slight with hostility or defensiveness. When you stick to the facts, focusing on the issue at hand rather than the person, you avoid triggering these defensive reactions. Instead of saying, "You always think you're right," you could say, "I think there is a difference in how we see this situation, and I believe X, Y, and Z points support my perspective." By keeping the focus on the facts, you sidestep their tendency to turn the conversation into a battle about their worth or intelligence. One important aspect of logical communication is the ability to recognize when a conversation is going nowhere. Narcissists often derail discussions to avoid accountability or to maintain their sense of superiority. They may deflect, change the subject, or resort to insults to regain control. In these situations, it is essential to recognize when continuing the conversation will only serve to further entrench their behavior. When you sense that the narcissist is using tactics to divert or manipulate the discussion, calmly disengage or set a clear boundary. For instance, you could say, I don't think this conversation is productive right now, and I would prefer to discuss this when we can both remain calm and focus on the issue at hand. This statement is firm, logical, and leaves no room for manipulation. Using logical communication also helps you keep a sense of control in the relationship. Narcissists often manipulate others by exploiting emotional vulnerability, guilt, or fear. When you keep the conversation grounded in facts, you take away their ability to use those emotional levers against you. Your ability to reason, express your thoughts clearly, and stay composed under pressure not only protects your own emotional well-being, but also reduces the narcissist's power to dominate the conversation. They may become frustrated at your unwillingness to engage in emotional drama, and this frustration can lead to a reduction in their attempts to manipulate or control you. Ultimately, logical communication is about maintaining your integrity and emotional autonomy while navigating the complexities of interacting with a narcissist. By focusing on clear, objective reasoning, you create a framework that prevents the narcissist from using emotional manipulation to control the dynamic. This approach allows you to assert yourself without getting caught in the narcissist's web of emotional deceit and power plays. Over time, they will begin to recognize that their usual tactics no longer work, and they will find it harder to manipulate you into doing their bidding. Withholding validation from a narcissist is one of the most effective strategies for undermining their fragile ego. Narcissists, by definition, rely heavily on external sources of validation to reinforce their inflated sense of self-worth. Their sense of identity is intricately tied to the admiration and approval they receive from others. When you withhold this validation, you essentially take away the fuel that sustains their ego. The narcissist, who thrives on constant praise and attention, will be left scrambling to find other sources of validation, often resorting to manipulative tactics or emotional outbursts in an attempt to regain the control they once had over you. The narcissist's need for validation is insatiable. They require constant praise, admiration, and recognition to maintain their sense of superiority. This need stems from their underlying insecurity, which they mask with arrogance and a belief in their own grandiosity. If left unchecked, this dependency can create a toxic dynamic where the narcissist continually demands validation, often at the expense of others' well-being. Withholding validation disrupts this cycle and sends a clear message that their self-worth cannot be determined by your approval. This strategy may seem simple, but it requires discipline and consistency. The narcissist will likely test you to see if you will fall back into the pattern of providing them with the attention and validation they crave. This is where many people falter, as they may feel compelled to give in, either because they are afraid of confrontation or because they feel pity for the narcissist. However, giving them validation only strengthens their grip on you and reinforces their false sense of self. The more you withhold, the more the narcissist will struggle to maintain their facade. It's important to remember that withholding validation is not the same as being cruel or dismissive. This isn't about purposely hurting the narcissist or trying to cause them emotional pain. Rather, it's about protecting your own emotional space and refusing to engage in a cycle of unhealthy reinforcement. When you stop validating a narcissist, you are no longer feeding into their distorted sense of importance, but simply refusing to contribute to the illusion they have created. This will disrupt their carefully constructed narrative and force them to face the reality that their sense of self-worth is not dependent on your admiration. In many cases, narcissists will react to this withdrawal of validation with frustration, anger, or confusion. Their egos are fragile and they cannot tolerate the absence of constant reinforcement. They may try to manipulate you into providing the validation they crave by guilt-tripping you or playing on your empathy. They may accuse you of being selfish or ungrateful for the things they have done for you. These emotional appeals are attempts to bring you back into the cycle of validation and admiration, but you must stand firm. The key to this approach is consistency. If you give in even once, it reinforces the idea that their approval is necessary for your peace of mind or self-worth. Narcissists are particularly adept at manipulating others by exploiting their emotions, but by refusing to give them the validation they seek, you regain control of the situation. Withholding validation also means that you stop enabling their self-absorption. Narcissists often surround themselves with people who constantly affirm their greatness and provide them with endless praise. By choosing not to validate them, you stop being a part of this echo chamber that reinforces their distorted self-perception. This can be incredibly disorienting for the narcissist, as they will no longer have someone to mirror their ego onto. They may attempt to provoke a response from you, trying to re-engage you in the validation game, but the goal is to remain indifferent and detached. The more you refuse to feed into their need for external validation, the more you disrupt their sense of control. It's also important to note that withholding validation doesn't mean completely ignoring the narcissist or being emotionally unavailable. There are situations where you may need to maintain some level of communication, especially if you have a working or family relationship with the narcissist. The goal is not to cut them off entirely, but to stop providing them with the emotional fuel they rely on. This means acknowledging them without offering the excessive praise or admiration they seek. In some cases, simply offering neutral responses to their achievements or comments, without exaggerated enthusiasm or reinforcement, can make a significant impact. This neutral stance forces the narcissist to confront their own inadequacies, as they are no longer able to rely on you for the constant admiration they are accustomed to. Withholding validation also allows you to regain a sense of power in the relationship. Narcissists thrive on control, and one of the ways they maintain that control is through the manipulation of others' perceptions of them. When you stop providing them with validation, you stop being a part of their narrative. You are no longer a source of reinforcement for their inflated self-engine, and this forces them to either change their approach or face the reality that their behavior is not as effective as they thought. Ultimately, withholding validation is not about punishing the narcissist, but about preserving your own emotional well-being and autonomy. Narcissists are often experts at wearing down the resolve of others by exploiting their need for connection and validation. However, when you resist this manipulation and refuse to participate in their ego game, you reclaim your own space and make it clear that their validation is not necessary for your sense of self. The narcissist's need for external approval is their greatest weakness, and by withholding validation, you take away the power they seek to wield over you. Challenging the narcissist's narrative of superiority is one of the most potent ways to destabilize their fragile sense of self. Narcissists often build an identity centered around the idea that they are superior to everyone around them. This belief is not grounded in reality, but rather a defense mechanism to hide their deep insecurities. They create a distorted image of themselves, one that requires constant reinforcement and admiration to maintain. When you challenge this narrative, you force them to confront the discrepancy between their self-image and the reality they attempt to hide. This can create significant cognitive dissonance for the narcissist, as it threatens their entire sense of self-worth. To challenge the narcissist narrative, you must first recognize that they will go to great lengths to maintain the illusion of superiority. They often inflate their accomplishments, exaggerate their intelligence, and belittle others to make themselves appear more impressive. This creates a one-sided relationship where the narcissist expects constant admiration and subservience from those around them. If you challenge this carefully constructed image, they will react with hostility, defensiveness, or even aggression. They are not used to having their inflated ego questioned, as it undermines their entire sense of control. The first step in challenging their narrative is to see through the facade they present. Narcissists rely on exaggeration and manipulation to craft an image of themselves as being more important, more capable, or more worthy of attention than they actually are. By recognizing the gap between their self-presentation and reality, you can approach the situation with greater clarity and confidence. Understanding that their narrative is based on insecurity rather than genuine superiority will give you the strength to challenge it without fear or doubt. One effective way to challenge the narcissist narrative is by questioning their grandiose claims in a calm and non-confrontational manner. Narcissists are often used to people accepting their exaggerated stories without question. So when you respond with logical, reasoned questions, it can cause them to feel destabilized. For example, if a narcissist claims they are the best at something, you could ask, "What makes you say that?" Or, "What evidence do you have to support that?" These types of questions force the narcissist to provide proof for their assertions, which they may struggle to do. When they fail to back up their exaggerated claims, it weakens their narrative and forces them to reconsider the image they have created. Another way to challenge their narrative is to provide alternative perspectives or truths that contradict their self-serving narrative. For instance, if the narcissist constantly brags about their achievements or superiority, You might mention other people's contributions or accomplishments that they tend to overlook. This is not about attacking the narcissist, but about subtly showing that their view is not the only valid one. By introducing other perspectives, you expose the narcissist's tendency to manipulate the narrative to suit their needs, thereby undermining their claim of superiority. It's important to note that challenging a narcissist's narrative requires a certain level of emotional detachment. If you engage with them emotionally or defensively, it will only play into their hands. Narcissists thrive on emotional responses because they can use those responses to manipulate you further. Therefore, it's crucial that you remain composed and rational when confronting their inflated sense of self. If you remain calm and composed, the narcissist will be forced to confront their own inconsistencies without having a convenient emotional outburst to deflect the conversation. Another method of challenging the narcissist's narrative is by asserting your own strengths and value without boasting or seeking their approval. Narcissists often operate in an environment where they dominate the conversation and control the perception of those around them. When you assert your own value and accomplishments, it challenges their need to be the center of attention. By presenting yourself as confident, capable, and self-assured, you disrupt their narrative of superiority and send a message that their validation is not necessary for your self-worth. This can make them feel threatened as it places you on equal footing with them, forcing them to reconsider their position of dominance. It is also important to recognize that challenging the narcissist narrative does not always lead to immediate change or acknowledgement from them. Narcissists are rarely open to feedback or constructive criticism as it directly challenges their self-impiction. They may deflect, ignore, or even become hostile in response to being questioned. However, by consistently challenging their narrative, you begin to expose the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Over time, this can cause them to feel insecure or uncertain, which is something they try to avoid at all costs. The more you resist their attempts to control the narrative, the less power they have to manipulate or intimidate you. It's essential to be prepared for the narcissist's attempts to turn the tables on you. When their superiority is questioned, they may attempt to invalidate your perspective or paint you as the problem. They may even try to convince others that you are the one who is deluded or in the wrong. This is a classic tactic used to deflect attention from their own insecurities. However, if you remain firm in your stance and continue to challenge their narrative without becoming emotionally entangled, you maintain your position of strength. Their need to maintain control over the narrative will ultimately backfire, as they will find it harder to manipulate or deceive you. Challenging a narcissist's narrative of superiority is not an easy task, as it involves confronting their most deeply held beliefs about themselves. However, by doing so, you expose the vulnerability and insecurity that lie beneath their arrogance. You force them to question the very foundation of their self-image, which destabilizes their ability to manipulate and control others. While they may react with anger or resistance, consistently challenging their narrative is one of the most effective ways to reduce their influence and regain control over your interactions with them. Setting boundaries with a narcissist is not only important, it's essential for maintaining your emotional health and protecting yourself from their manipulative tendencies. Narcissists by nature do not respect boundaries. Their sense of entitlement often leads them to believe they have the right to control, manipulate, or demand from others without consideration for personal space, feelings, or limits. Therefore, it is crucial that you establish firm, clear boundaries from the outset and hold your ground consistently, no matter how much resistance you encounter. A narcissist views boundaries as something to be tested or ignored. They do not see other people's needs, emotions, or rights as equal to their own. So they frequently overstep boundaries without a second thought. Whether it's interrupting conversations, making unreasonable demands, or invading your personal life, a narcissist will often push the limits to see how much they can get away with. If you allow these boundary violations to continue without consequence, they will only escalate, and you will find yourself more and more drained by the relationship. One of the most common ways a narcissist will attempt to break your boundaries is by gaslighting, manipulating you into doubting your own perceptions and feelings. They might say things like, "You're too sensitive," or "That never happened," in an attempt to make you question your own reality. Gaslighting is a powerful tactic because it causes you to lose confidence in your judgment, making it easier for the narcissist to overstep further. Therefore, it's crucial that you remain strong and clear about what your boundaries are and why they're important to you. When you set a boundary with a narcissist, it must be clear, concise, and non-negotiable. If you say you don't want to discuss a certain topic, don't give in to their attempts to reopen the conversation. If you've told them you need personal space, stand firm when they attempt to invade it. It's also important to understand that narcissists will not respect boundaries simply because you ask them to. This is a hard truth to accept, but it's necessary to keep in mind. They operate from a place of entitlement, so their willingness to respect your boundaries will often depend on how much they can manipulate you or extract something from you. If you're too willing to accommodate them, or if you give in easily, they will see this as an opportunity to continue crossing those lines. This is why it's essential to be consistent and unwavering when it comes to enforcing your boundaries. The narcissist may try to guilt trip you or use emotional manipulation to get you to back down. They may accuse you of being selfish, cruel, or unkind for asserting yourself, but these are simply tactics to make you feel guilty for taking care of yourself. It's vital to recognize this manipulation for what it is and resist the urge to apologize or feel responsible for their emotional state. A narcissist will often play on your empathy and guilt to regain control. Their goal is to make you feel as though you're in the wrong for establishing boundaries, even though your actions are simply a form of self-preservation. Maintaining boundaries with a narcissist requires mental and emotional strength. It's not easy to stand up to someone who is accustomed to having their way, especially when they react with anger or aggression. You may face emotional outbursts, threats, or even attempts to alienate you from your support network. However, it's crucial to recognize that these reactions are not your responsibility. The narcissist's inability to respect your boundaries is a reflection of their own character, not an indication that your boundaries are flawed or unreasonable. The first step in enforcing boundaries is to be clear with yourself about what you will and will not tolerate. Ask yourself what behaviors you will allow and what you will not, and be honest with yourself about your limits. Once you have identified your boundaries, communicate them directly to the narcissist in a calm, confident manner. Do not leave room for ambiguity or misunderstanding. For example, if they are prone to showing up uninvited or making demands on your time without prior notice, tell them that you expect notice in advance and that you are not available unless they respect your schedule. Be firm and do not apologize for setting these limits. If the narcissist tries to push back against your boundaries, do not engage in an argument or try to justify your decisions. Narcissists thrive on conflict and will attempt to manipulate the situation to make you doubt yourself. Instead, stick to your position calmly and assertively. If they continue to cross boundaries, you may need to implement consequences. For example, you could limit contact, withdraw emotionally, or cease providing them with the attention or resources they seek. A powerful part of setting boundaries with a narcissist is recognizing that their behavior is not about you. It is a reflection of their own internal struggles and insecurities. Narcissists need constant validation and control, and they will try to undermine your self-worth to keep you in a subordinate position. However, by setting clear boundaries and refusing to engage with their manipulative tactics, you are asserting that you will not allow their insecurities to dictate your actions. It is also important to keep in mind that boundaries are not about punishing the narcissist. They are about protecting yourself. Setting boundaries is a form of self-care, and it is necessary for preserving your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. While the narcissist may attempt to portray your boundaries as a personal attack, in reality they are simply a healthy and necessary measure to maintain a functional relationship, or to walk away from one that is toxic. By setting clear and firm boundaries, you are establishing the groundwork for healthier interactions, not just with the narcissist, but with everyone in your life. You see, in life there are forces that seek to dominate, forces that wish to impose their will on others. Narcissism, in its essence, is one of these forces, a manifestation of an inflated sense of self, a fragile ego constantly in need of validation. It's the distortion of the self, a mask built on a foundation of insecurity. A narcissist's ego is fragile, despite the outward appearance of strength and invulnerability. The narcissist presents themselves as superior, often exhibiting grandiose behaviors and attitudes as if they are the center of attention. However, beneath this exterior lies an ego that is paper-thin, easily bruised, and highly vulnerable to any challenge to their self-image. This fragile nature is the root of many of their behaviors. They constantly seek validation from others to reinforce their inflated sense of self-worth. When they don't receive this validation, their fragile sense of self is threatened, often leading to defensive behavior such as anger, manipulation, or emotional outbursts. Understanding the fragility of the narcissist's ego is the first step in dealing with them effectively. Unlike a truly confident individual who can withstand criticism and feedback, the narcissist reacts with intense defensiveness at even the slightest perceived slight. This defensiveness comes from an internal insecurity that they desperately work to hide from others. This vulnerability is often masked by an overcompensating attitude of arrogance or entitlement. But deep down, the narcissist fears that their worth is not as high as they project. They fear that if others were to see them for who they truly are, they would be exposed as weak and insignificant. Their desire for control is directly tied to this fragility. The narcissist seeks to dominate others because it gives them a false sense of security and power. If they can make others feel small or inferior, it reinforces their belief that they are special, that they are more important than anyone else. This is why narcissists often surround themselves with people who feed into their ego, constantly praising them, never challenging their beliefs or actions. The more they can convince others that they are indeed as special as they think they are, the more secure their ego becomes, at least temporarily. This fragile ego means that the narcissist's self-esteem is built on shaky ground. It's constantly in flux, dependent on the external world to affirm their worth. As a result, they're like emotional chameleons, changing their behavior and appearance based on who they're trying to impress or manipulate at any given moment. They will mirror the people around them, adopting their language, ideas, and even emotions, but only as a strategy to gain admiration or maintain control. This is not true self-expression, but a calculated attempt to create a facade that keeps their ego intact. However, this facade is easily cracked. The moment they face criticism or anything that undermines their self-impunity, the narcissist will react with hostility or defensiveness. If they feel slighted or rejected, their typical response is to lash out in a way that attempts to reassert their superiority. They may resort to name-calling, demeaning comments, or attempting to undermine the credibility of those who challenge them. This is because their internal sense of self-worth is so fragile that they cannot bear any suggestion that they are anything less than perfect. One of the most powerful ways to deal with a narcissist is to understand this fragility and use it against them, not in a malicious way, but as a means of disarming them. When you recognize that their need for validation is not a strength, but a weakness, it allows you to maintain your own emotional distance. The narcissist relies on your reaction to their behavior to maintain their inflated ego. If you do not give them the validation they seek, or even better, if you remain indifferent to their attempts to impress or manipulate you, their sense of control begins to crumble. This is not to say that you should attack or belittle them in return. Narcissists are highly sensitive to any form of criticism and rejection, and pushing them too hard may result in volatile reactions. The key is to recognize that the more you cater to their need for admiration, the more you feed into their false sense of self. If you can resist this urge and maintain your composure, you will disrupt their need for constant validation. The narcissist's fragile ego cannot withstand long periods of emotional detachment and indifference from others. Eventually, this will cause them to either break down in frustration or seek out someone else to manipulate. It's important to note that recognizing the fragility of a narcissist's ego doesn't mean you should pity them. Their behavior may stem from deep-seated insecurity, but that doesn't excuse the harm they can cause others. The challenge lies in seeing them for what they truly are. Individuals who use others as a mirror to validate their sense of self-worth without falling into the trap of offering them what they crave. Instead, you must remain grounded in your own sense of self, unaffected by their attempts to control or diminish you. Ultimately, the narcissist's fragility is their greatest weakness. Understanding this fragility gives you the power to disengage emotionally, stop feeding their need for validation, and recognize their behavior for what it truly is, a mask designed to hide insecurity and fear. The more you understand their need for validation and how it is tied to their fragile ego, the better equipped you will be to navigate interactions with them, protecting your own sense of self in the process.